So tomorrow is going to be the day probably where I'll be able to plant out my tomatoes. And in honor of that occasion, let me give you some tomato facts. So tomatoes can be mainly divided into determinate varieties and indeterminate varieties. So the determinate ones, like these ones here, I don't know whether you can see them. It's these ones that have produced a flower already. These they grow only to a particular height, and usually that's towards, I guess in my climate, that's a kind of a zone 8 here in the south of England. It'll be towards the end of summer that they will produce their maximum height. Even though it may not be really evident in that clip that I showed you, these plants tend to be stocky and short and really stumpy looking. And they can be put out in hanging baskets, for example. And last year I grew them in that green container of mine, the standing planter that I have my thyme currently growing in. So the determinate ones, they top out towards the end of summer. They produce most of their fruit at the same time. Not all at the same time, I find. Most at the same time. And then they would produce like little crops later on, and they will tail off towards the end of summer. Just like the other indeterminate ones. The indeterminate ones, on the other hand, will grow tall and strong, and they will grow all through summer and keep producing fruits throughout summer. Their main crop doesn't come all at one time. They tend to produce sort of smaller crops throughout the growing season. So I started my seeds in February. I think I did start them under lights. And then I grew them on until April, mid-April under lights, and then after that I just put them on the windowsill, and they've stretched out a little bit. Now this doesn't really matter, the stretching out doesn't really matter, because tomato plants can be planted deep even if they're stretched out, because they will produce roots from the leaf nodes. What I mean by that is, if you pull out, for example, this leaf and you plant it up till here, so even though it's rooted somewhere here, and you plant it, you take out this leaf and you plant it here, it will produce roots from here. So it doesn't really matter if your plant is stretched out. So my space is quite limited, so I'm going to use like 5-gallon bags for most of my tomatoes. And I'm going to put 3 of them in the ground, and 1 is going to be in the hanging basket. So the determinate variety that I'm growing this year, which is called Tiny Tim, I believe, that's going to be in the hanging planter. Yeah. Overall, I've tried to choose tomatoes that will give me a good variety. If I had the space, I would grow 20-30 different types, but because I don't really have space, I have to try and choose and limit my varieties. So I've chosen one that's indeterminate, that I can sort of put up in a planter and use that extra space up on the fencing. And I've tried to choose red cherries. I've tried to choose a red salad tomato, another one for sauces, and I've tried also to pick a yellow one for variety, and I've sort of stayed true to 3 varieties which I liked from last year, and I've added 4 more. No, that's not true. I've stayed true to 4 varieties that I grew last year, and then I've added another 4 to kind of try out this year. Okay, and now it's been 2 days since I shot the initial bit of the video. Today is going to be the day I'm going to plant them out. But before I do that, let me quickly tell you about the varieties that I've got. Right, so I've got here the Czech bush. This is an indeterminate tomato variety. A quick search tells me that it's going to give me lots and lots of red fruit with good flavor early on in the season. Okay, so it's great for container growing, that's fine. I've done it last year. I'm not sure whether the taste was all that great, but I'm going to grow it again this year. I think it was a first to fruit, and it did give me lots of fruit, I think. But last year was a bit of a mess, and I can't really remember whether I labeled this correctly. Right, the next variety that I've got is the black cherry. You know what was interesting about this tomato last year? So I grew it last year and it was amazing. I had 2 plants. I believe one was from one pack and the other one was from a different pack. Like from 2 different suppliers. And one was amazing tasting. The other one was good, but it wasn't as good as the other one. So it's in the strains or in the seeds that you get. So I guess that's probably why when someone is like really raving about a tomato like online and you grow the same thing and you don't quite get the same results, you wonder, oh my goodness, what are they talking about? But actually it might be this. Now, because I didn't know which pack this particular amazing black cherry came from, I'm taking a guess and growing it from one particular packet that I think was probably the actual one that I really loved last year. Now, what you could do if you really love something is you could vegetatively propagate it. So what you could do is you know, cut off something like this with a couple of leaf nodes and then root the plant in water and sort of keep it through winter. Now I did plan to do it and I did kind of get around to doing it, but then once the roots actually grow out, I didn't have time and I lost motivation and I didn't plant it out, and therefore I do not have, you know, that plant from last year. So 2 other varieties I've got are the amateur one, the tomato amateur, and then I've got the beef burlesque. Now the tomato amateur, I have read now this can be grown outside in the cool climate that I have, which is a kind of a zone 8, I suppose in terms of winter hardiness, but it doesn't really get as hot. And I've seen, you know, people in Wisconsin get their tomatoes in August, September, and that's when I get my ripe tomatoes as well. So I guess in terms of how hot it gets, it's probably like a zone 5, right, in terms of like the peakness of summer. Yeah, so anyway, the amateur is going to go out. Okay, so a quick search tells me this is a determinate variety and can do outdoors. Since I don't have a greenhouse, this is going to go outdoors. And then I have the beef burlesque. Okay, and Google tells me that it's great for growing outdoors or indoors. So you can do that in the south of England. And I think this is an indeterminate variety. I also have sun gold. Right, I'm super excited for this variety this year. Never grown it before, but it's very, very popular. It's an F1 indeterminate tomato. The last one is a San Marzano. I guess this one needs no introduction. I'm growing it for sauces. Okay, here we are. I am gonna plant out my first tomato of 2023. That's gonna be the outdoor girl, and she's gonna be here. This is like pretty nice workable soil, so I'm just gonna dig a hole here and I'm gonna pop her in here. So later on, once these ranunculi are done, I'll just take these out and hopefully this will there'll be enough space. Okay, so I'm ready to now plant. I'm gonna remove the lower leaves here and maybe plant deep up till maybe here. This here is my tiny Tim, and I'm planting it in a hanging basket. Surrounding it are 3 basil plants that I started from seed. Usually you can do companion planting with basil and marigolds. I've chosen basil here. After I'm done, I generally copper tape around the container like this. Well, the grow bag. I usually do a double ring. Okay, what about support systems? If I were to do these complex Florida weave and trellising methods that are demonstrated, well, not complex, but rather time consuming, and you have to dedicate some time to it. Now, I don't have the time to do it, and so I found that really in the climate that I grow the tomatoes in doesn't really require it. I can do a pretty good job by just staking it up as it grows. Its growth here is not that extensive. I'm never going to grow it to 6 feet. Who knows with the climate this year, but yeah, that's usually the case. It just grows up to maybe 4 or 5 feet, and that can be sort of staked up with tall pea sticks. I've got pretty tall ones here. They can be used to stake them up. The question is, to greenhouse or not to greenhouse? As you can see, I just do not have the space for a greenhouse. Maybe a temporary one. You can have a grow bag and sort of have a pop-up bag over it to sort of simulate greenhouse-like conditions. I suspect I probably do not need it where I live because a couple of heat waves maybe can help my tomatoes ripen. However, if we do not get something like that, a sort of a couple of weeks of high temperatures close to 30, what we could do is to put individual plastic pop-ups to help ripen the tomatoes. I will show you an idea, or rather I'll show you a picture of what I mean. My tomatoes will grow and give me lots of lovely fruit, and hopefully it's a good tomato year for you too.